You are listening to the Love Unplugged podcast, episode 24. Today we are chatting all about how we can master our thoughts and practice manifestation. My guest today shares his journey to self-discovery and all that he's learned from his endless research into how our thoughts determine our behaviors and what you attract into your life. We go pretty deep, therefore today will be part 1 with part 2 coming at you next Thursday. So grab yourself a cup of organic tea and get ready to learn how important our thoughts are in living our best life. You are listening to Love Unplugged, a podcast focused on love in all its forms. I'm your host, Jessica Fergon, hopeful romantic and founder of Project Love. I found that too often love is set aside or taken for granted, and we tend to forget how to care for ourselves and our important relationships in the day-to-day chaos. So let's slow down, tune in, and begin our journey of rediscovering love. From honest heart-to-heart conversations with real couples and knowledgeable guests to deep dive reviews of new products and services that will help you feel beautiful inside and out. If you're looking for relatable advice or wanting to be inspired by real-life love stories, you've come to the right place. Without further ado, let's get to it. Hello, everybody. I am so honored to welcome Karim Hemmings, entrepreneur, father, and husband. He is deeply introspective and passionate about self-improvement. And today we're going to hear all about his journey of self-discovery. And he is the very first male who is a solo guest on the show. So I'm super excited about that. So welcome, Karim. I'm so honored to have you as my guest, and I'm so excited to learn all about your story. But before we start, for those that don't know you, I would love for you to share a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me. I'm honored to be the first solo male guest. So a bit about me. Karim Hemmings. I live in Vancouver, and I'm actually going to use something from, I had a workshop that I was in a week ago, and they asked me a question. What are your 3 greatest personal and career accomplishments? And so the ones that I came up with is, the first one is that I convinced my brilliant and beautiful wife to marry me.
Yes.
So that's a part of my life. My beautiful wife is a huge part of my life. So I'm a husband to her. I'm a father to 3 beautiful daughters. We just welcomed a new baby in May. So that's another thing. I'm a daddy to 3 beautiful daughters. And I'm introspective. That's definitely a good one. I always like to label myself as what Andy Andrews would call a noticer. He wrote this wonderful book called The Noticer. And it's actually a true story of his life. And one of the fascinating things that happened when he was young, he just made some poor choices. And by the time I think he was 19, he ended up homeless, living under a bridge. This guy named Mr. Jones walked into his life, and he refers to Mr. Jones as the noticer. And the way he describes Mr. Jones is a guy who noticed things in terms of perspective in unique ways that made him look at his life differently. And ultimately, his life completely turned around by meeting this guy. And so I would say that I'm a noticer. That's probably one of the things that I kind of pride myself on. And I think I see things in life that most people kind of look over and go, yeah, that's just the way things are. And I think my curiosity kind of kicks in and I ask questions and notice things. So that's that. And then what do I do for a living? I'm in sales.
Sales.
I am a salesman, and a proud one at that. That's something that I didn't think I would ever get into, which is a whole nother story behind that. But I am very proud of what I do. I believe that the world needs more great salesmen and saleswomen who really provide value and service to people. And so, yeah.
You do it well. That I know firsthand. It's quite a lot. It's quite a lot. So I want to start at the beginning here. Have you always been introspective and self-analyzing? Like, I know you grew up in a household of women. So did that help you kind of pay more attention to being self-aware? What was your life and attitude like before?
That's a really great question. It's a bit of a loaded one. If I were to go back to introspection, it has to go back to my childhood. So as far as I can remember, yeah, I've always been very introspective. And I think a lot of it comes from I grew up in a very chaotic household. My father was an alcoholic. So there was a lot of, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, sometimes physical abuse. And I think what we struggled with in terms of kind of relationally in my family caused a lot of chaos in my mind and kind of trying to figure out how to navigate through life. And then we were quite poor too. I mean, I would never say that we were, so destitute that we were in, deep poverty, but we really only had enough money to kind of get by every single month. And so I think I grew up in this environment where I knew that life could be better, but I saw people in my life that weren't able to kind of work through it. And so I think introspection often begins with seeing things outwardly that you feel are not in harmony with what you believe should be. And I think seeing that made me go inward and go, what if my life turns out like this when I get older? And so I need to figure out why their life is the way that it is, and then figure out what am I carrying within myself that might potentially lead to becoming that. And so I think it all really started from probably a very early age where I found myself in my head. I'm very introverted. So I think naturally introverts are always in their own minds and always, thinking about those type of things. So yeah, that's probably where it started.
That's a lot to think about at such a young age.
Yeah.
That's a lot to go through at such a young age. Did anyone in your family kind of help you navigate the thoughts that you were experiencing, trying to kind of understand the situation that you were in as a family?
Unfortunately not. Unfortunately, I didn't have very much guidance. I was actually having a conversation with my dad a few months ago, and he's come around. He's been sober for like 5 years.
That's wonderful.
We've solved a lot of the issues that happened in my childhood. But one of the things he said to me was he apologized for just the lack of guidance. It was just like he couldn't figure out his own life. How is he then going to kind of help me work through a lot of what I needed to work through? And I think once again, going back to that introversion, you really kind of bottle everything in. My second daughter is very much like me, where it's like if she sees that other people are having a hard time, she'll just keep her own problems to herself. She doesn't want to burden anyone. You kind of just feel like you need to go through it on your own. And so I think I spent most of my childhood kind of in my own head. And I was really good at covering up a lot of pain, a lot of trauma. I was the kid who everyone would look at and go, oh, he's doing perfectly fine, but kind of suffering in silence. And so a part of it was kind of, I don't think I got guidance because I never really asked for it. But I also don't think I had people in my life that could have really helped me a ton anyways. And it probably wasn't until I got into my early 20s that I found guidance. And it wasn't necessarily from people that I knew personally, but it was a lot of mentorship through books and audios and seminars and things like that I started to find guidance on how to navigate through a lot of the trauma that I went through as a kid.
Wow. As a man growing up with so many females in your family and not having that male lead that to kind of teach you everything you need to know as a man, how did you deal with that?
A lot of resentment.
Okay.
Lots of resentment. I was very, very angry at my dad for a very long time. A fascinating thing about fathers is they could pretty much do anything to you, and it's very hard to stay angry at them. I find that I've talked to a lot of women who have just been completely neglected by their fathers and still, they're 25 and they've been abandoned and all these things, but they still have this deep desire for their fathers. So I don't know if it's, it's probably the same with mothers as well, but I found for myself as a man, a deep yearning to just have a relationship with my dad and for him to show me things, right? Like, I wanted him to show me how to tie a tie and, how to shave. And like, he just was so absent during all of those things that it built in a lot of resentment. And I think I continued to pursue the relationship probably until I was about 15 or 16 years old. And then at that point, there was just so much trauma that I was just done with him. I just kind of vowed that I would never respect the man and I would just never, ever see our relationship being repaired. And so I think a lot of it was just resentment. I think it did push me towards my mother. My mom was very nurturing, very loving. I always like to say that all the hugs and the kisses and the lack of I love yous that I didn't get from my father, my mom made up for. But my mom was also a very angry person. So it's kind of like when she loved you. But when she was mad, you kind of saw the wrath. And so I think I naturally picked up a lot of what people would call feminine attributes, which I don't like, because I think sometimes what we do with men is we say if they show emotions, then they're feminine attributes. They're still male attributes.
Mm-hmm.
Males,
feelings are feelings.
Feelings are feelings, right?
Yeah.
And so it doesn't need to be kind of a male or female type of thing. But I think I did kind of lean towards more of a nurturing aspect. I think it led me to have more female friends growing up and just connect with women more because I just understood them more. And oddly enough, now I have 3 daughters. So that kind of works out great because I definitely don't know what I would do with a son. Yeah.
Yeah, I could totally see that. Was there a pivotal moment in your life that kind of made you stop and think, okay, I need to make some changes now? Like there's things that are just maybe not going well, or I just don't see myself going down the path that I'm currently going down. And I need to now look at what I need to change in order to change where I'm going.
Yeah, there's probably a few. So I would say that I'm a big believer that it's not always these big moments in your life that change you, but there's a lot of little ones. Mm-hmm. But there is definitely some things that stand out in my life. So when I was 20 years old, I got my ex-wife pregnant. And so we ended up getting married, and I found myself married with a baby at the age of 20.
Wow.
Yeah. It was quite an overwhelming time in my life because I had graduated high school and I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't think I wanted to go to university. I didn't feel like at that time, I didn't think I was smart enough to go to university. We didn't have any money to send me to university. So I had all of these limiting ideas and beliefs about what I could and couldn't do. And so I didn't go to university, and I ended up taking a few years off. I did some acting when I was younger. So I ended up having about $10,000 in a trust fund for me. And so I thought, I got freedom. I'm 18 years old. I don't need to work. I have this money. I'm still living at home. I'm just going to kind of relax and enjoy life. And so I did that for about 2 years, and then found myself in a situation where I was going to have to get married and have a baby, and I had no job.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
That's quite the pickle.
Which is not the best situation to be in when you're about to support a family. And so we ended up getting married. We had our first daughter, and when my first daughter was 5 months old, she got pregnant again, my wife. And so I was 21 with 2 babies in diapers, and we were supporting the family on my income. And I was at the time working in security, which back then was, I was getting paid $12 an hour. So yeah, we were in poverty at that point. And when I got married and found out that I was going to be starting this family, that was a huge wake up call for me, because for the first time in my life, I had to think about other people other than myself. And I had responsibilities now. And so in high school, I don't think I had read a book from front to cover at all. I actually don't think I've ever read a book. So before I graduated, I don't think I ever read a book from front to back. And if I did, it was forced. And it was very like, you skim through the notes. Yeah.
Get through it.
Exactly. And so I was under the impression that I didn't like reading. The problem was that I just didn't like reading the stuff that schools were telling me that I had to read. And so when I ended up in this situation where I needed to reassess my life and my decisions and my choices and what am I going to do to provide for this family, I just picked up books like crazy. And I just wanted to learn very simple things. I wanted to learn how to be a husband because I hadn't seen my father be a good one. I picked up books on how to be a good father because I'm going to be a dad now. And so I think in that first year, I probably read close to 100 books. And it was just this deep desire to do right by my family. And I find that that's what either happens to people. Kids who grow up in traumatic environments or chaotic environments will do one of two things. They're either going to do their best to try and not repeat the same mistakes, or they're going to find themselves, even though they don't want to, repeating the exact same things that their parents did. It's kind of what ended up happening to my dad, where he said, I didn't want to end up like my father, and then I ended up exactly like him. And so for me, it was just this deep desire to not have a home life that reflected anything like mine. And so I just decided to pursue personal growth with a fervor that ultimately helped a ton. The problem was that there's so much conditioning that goes into a human in those early years, that to think that a year worth of positive conditioning is going to change your life overnight, it's just probably not going to happen. And so you look at it, it's like, yeah, I had, 20 years of conditioning of just some really bad ideas and thoughts and all of those type of things. And it was really, really, really difficult to overcome that. And so that was probably the first moment where I was like, okay, I need to make some changes. And I made a real commitment to my personal growth. And then I spent probably the next 3 to 4 years devouring personal development. Along with the books, I would probably listen to upwards to 10 to 14 hours of audios. So, anything from Jim Rohn to Tony Robbins to whatever I can get my hands on. It was like, if I was in the car, I was listening to an audio. If I was walking the dog, I was listening to the audio. While I was in the shower, I was listening to an audio. I like to joke and say that in those first few years, I don't think anybody on the planet was listening to more personal development than I was. And the very frustrating and disappointing thing about it was that fact that I was doing all of this work on input and doing all of this work on trying to change my mindset, and it just wasn't manifesting physically in my realities and into my world. And I was continuing to get the same results. And yeah, I grew and certain things were changing, but it wasn't consistent with the amount of volume that I was doing in my personal development. So I got discouraged. And that's the biggest mistake that I think I ever made in my early 20s, was putting in the effort to personally grow and not seeing the results fast enough and then giving up. And so I found myself after about 2 or 3 years, just like things weren't working out. So my marriage was falling apart. I always had a good relationship with my kids. So being a dad, because of the trauma, was so important to me. It was like everything else was falling apart, but that was the one thing that I felt that I was always doing a good job at. But I was still struggling financially. And I just couldn't seem to get out of this rut. And so I found myself in 2013 or 2014, my first marriage fell apart. And me and my ex-wife separated. And I was the type of person who was like, when I get married, I'm going to be married forever. And it was really, really hard for me to deal with this idea that I was going to get a divorce. Like I resisted it for like 3 years. I don't think the divorce didn't end up being finalized for 3 years because I just couldn't accept the fact that my marriage had failed. And so that was really, really, really difficult for me to just accept. And so 2013, 2014, the marriage fell apart, and then my life just went downhill from there. 2015, my sister tragically died from a cocaine overdose. My sister was 20 months older than me. We were super close. She was like the closest thing to me growing up. And with all childhood trauma that happens, you're really drawn to your siblings typically because you kind of relate with, all of the things that have happened. And so I remember I got a call in the middle of the night in 2015, and my mom was just sobbing on the phone saying, your sister's in the hospital right now. She's in a coma. She overdosed on cocaine. And so we ended up going to the hospital, and tragically, it was probably 3 days she was in a coma. And then the doctor came in and said that she was brain dead. And so we had to decide if we were going to pull the plug or what we were going to do. And so I lost my sister. She was 27. And that shook my world. It was just like, I saw someone so close to me, so young, lose their life. And it scared me because I've always been afraid of death. But it really made me look at life and go, life is really, really valuable and it's very, very precious. And you're not making the most of it. I think after being discouraged for all of the personal growth and then seeing everything fall apart, I had settled. I just got into a place where I was just like, I'm exhausted. I don't feel like I can do this anymore. And so, yeah, I got suicidal. It became a very, very dark period of my life. And so after she died, it was a pretty dark 6 months. But my sister's death taught me, one, to appreciate life. And it taught me how to deal with a lot of my emotions that I just did not deal with. And so I kind of went through this process of growth again. I just got this excitement for life. And I thought, if my sister's going to die, I don't want her to die in vain. I don't want to fall into a deeper depression and find myself in a state that she found herself in. And so I just decided that I was going to make some changes. And so it was probably 2017. It was actually winter of 2016. So about a year later, I was working with people with mental disabilities. And I had been there for about 5 years. And I was doing their day programs and working with them throughout the day. And so I ended up taking over a guy's client who he was working with because he was going to Barbados for 3 weeks. And so I ended up taking over the work that he was doing with this individual. And basically, he was the client that I was working with was so violent that you couldn't really go out in public with him.
Okay.
So you pretty much would go to his house in the morning, feed him, get him dressed, all those type of things. And then you would just kind of watch him for the day. And so I found myself in the winter of 2016 with a lot of time to myself in this basement suite, kind of reflecting. And I don't know what it was. I just remember being in that basement and just having this moment of like, everything's got to change. Like, I have to basically change everything about my life. I didn't know what that was going to look like, but I just knew something had to change. And so I'm a planner. And so I pulled out a notebook and I just started writing like my financial goals and where do I want my relationship to be and all of these type of things that I wanted for my life. And I did a 1-year plan, a 5-year plan. I think I went all the way to 25 years. I just mapped it out and I just got it out. And then I finally realized kind of in that moment that, okay, one of the things I need to do is get out of this state of poverty, of just struggling financially. And I need to start working on my personal development in a way that I haven't done for a long time. And so I made a decision that day that I was going to quit my job and that I was going to get into sales. And for me, it was a simple idea. It was like, I want to do something where I get paid my worth. Mm-hmm. And the only thing that I knew that would do that was sales, right? When you're in sales, if you don't like how much money you earn, then work harder, grow more, and you can sell more. And there's really no limit on your income. And so I was like, okay, that's something that I'm going to have to do. And I didn't want to. Everything in me didn't want to do it because as an introvert, I always like to tell people prior to getting into sales, I was the type of person who didn't like calling Pizza Hut to order pizza. It was like any time I had to talk to another human being, if I could push that off on someone else would do it, right? So like my wife would book doctor appointments and all that type of stuff. I would just avoid it. And so what a silly thing to do is to get into sales when that's how afraid you are of talking to people. And so I ended up applying to all of these jobs, all of these sales jobs, and I had no sales experience. And so a bit naive, I'm super excited. I'm like, I'm going to change my life. This is going to be fantastic. So I think I applied to like 9 or 10 different places and no one phoned me back. And then finally I had a company phone me back, and it was the one company that I didn't want to work for because it was cold calling 8 hours a day. And I was like, I really don't want to. And so they ended up calling me and for my first interview. And so I had booked the interview when I was, applying for all of these jobs. And I was like, sure, that's one of them. There's going to be a ton. So finally, the time for the interview comes and I totally forgot about it because I didn't want the job. And so I'm driving to another city and I get this call from the HR lady and she's like, hey, it's so-and-so from so-and-so and calling for the interview. And I'm like, oh, right. Yeah, absolutely. And so we went through the first interview and then we went through the second interview. And at this point I realized no one was going to call me back. So I'm like, this is my only opportunity. And luckily enough, I ended up getting the job and it was a nightmare because yes, I was cold calling people 8 hours a day. And every morning for the first 6 months, I would wake up and I would want to vomit. Literally, physically would want to vomit is how scared I was about what I had to do. But I knew this. I knew there's a great quote that says everything you want in life is outside of your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that. And I was like, if I can just put myself in an environment where I'm forced to have to do these things, eventually I'll get over it. And I knew that if I could cold call 8 hours a day, then there's nothing in sales that will ever be difficult for me, ever. Any sales job that I get after this will be easy. And it ended up proving out true, because now the work that I do is a breeze. I love what I do. It's easy to talk to people. But yeah, that was a long answer for a few. What was the question? A few pivotal moments in your life. Yeah, those are.
You gave me the rundown.
Those are a few of them.
You've had quite the journey up till now, I must say. A lot of pivotal moments, and a lot of which most people would not come out the way that you have, to be honest. So just knowing you and now knowing your story, I'm blown away by what you've accomplished and who you are as a person. It's amazing.
That's
so what you've done has worked. So keep going on that. I want to talk about manifestation. I know you have a great story there, because you do have lofty sales goals, and there was a situation that happened with your family where you were needing to come up with some kind of lump sum of money to get to your next step. Yeah. So let's talk about that. Exactly, how did it start? And then walk me through kind of what that whole idea that came to your head as you were kind of thinking it through out loud.
Yeah. So I'm trying to go back in my mind. I think it was actually around the time where I was doing those cold calls, and I wanted to make more money, and I knew I wanted to do more than that. And so once again, I kind of have seasons in my life where I just go gung-ho on personal development. And so this was probably one of them. So I made a commitment. I was like, I'm going to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning every morning before work, and I'm going to listen to some personal development. And there was a period where I got into a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk.
Yes.
And he kind of lit a fire under me. And so I got into personal development quite heavy again around that time. And so there were a few books that kind of sparked this idea of thinking and manifesting. And one of them was a book by a guy named Bob Proctor. Bob Proctor was in the documentary The Secret. Bob Proctor is actually from Toronto originally. And he wrote this book called Born Rich. And it's on this idea of your thoughts become things. Mm-hmm. And so I started to kind of pick up books that talked about this idea, and it kind of seemed a little bit kooky to me. I'm pretty pragmatic. And so this idea that like your thoughts can manifest things into your life was a little bit weird. It made me feel a little bit uncomfortable. But the more and more I started to read books like Think and Grow Rich and, The Science of Getting Rich, in a book called As a Man Thinketh by James Allen, they just started to explain it in such a practical way that I started to go, what if this is true? What if your thoughts are more powerful than you really realize them to be? And it was very simple principles that made me think about this, because if you think about everything that we see in the physical world, everything you see in the physical world first had to appear in the mind of a human before it found its way into the world. Mm-hmm. So Bob Proctor has this beautiful saying where he goes, a painting that you see is not the original painting. It's only a duplicate, because the original painting was printed on the mind of the painter, and then it was duplicated into reality. And so we think about this all the time, right? Like, well, planes. How did a plane come into this world? Well, someone had to think the idea of a plane. And so everything that we see in the physical world, men and women had thoughts and ideas that then attracted to them the ways and the ideas that they needed to go about to make those things a physical reality. And so it's simple things like that that made me go, okay, yeah, that's true. That makes a ton of sense. And then you think about the idea of everything that you do in life is a result of a thought. You don't act without first thinking, right? And so you go, I'm hungry. And so then you act and you go and get food. Everything that you do, what precedes it is a thought. And so Bob Proctor started to talk about this idea that whatever a man thinks about, or whatever a man and woman thinks about all day long, they become. Whatever it is that you think about the most will find itself into your reality. And so he gave me a quick exercise in a book that I ended up trying. And it was, okay, try and focus on a dollar amount that you want to manifest. And so for me, it was a ridiculous, audacious $250,000, which made zero sense because I had never earned that much in a single year ever. And I never had that type of sum of money. So there was no realistic reason for me to think that this was going to happen in any short period of time. And so what I started to do was I started to visualize, $250,000 in my account. I tried to imagine what my life would look like with $250,000. At the time, we wanted to move out of the condo that we were living in. And we wanted to get a townhome because we had 2 young kids and we wanted to have another one, and the space just wasn't enough. And so I started to visualize all of these things, and then I started to do affirmations. So I recorded my voice saying, I'm so happy and grateful that I now have $250,000 in my possession. And I would listen to it over and over and over again. And when I would go to sleep, I would listen to it. And so it felt kind of silly for the first few weeks because obviously nothing happened and I was doing all of this work. And then all of a sudden I got this inspiration to read a book. And in the book, there was this story about a couple who ended up doing something very similar. They wanted to move into a new home, but they didn't have the money, and they wanted to do it by Christmas. And I think at the time it was like October. So that was like a few months. And so they ended up doing this, like this idea of saturating your thoughts with a certain idea. And the idea is this, that when you saturate your thoughts with a certain idea, you get on a certain frequency and vibration that attracts the people, the ideas, the books, whatever it is that you need to make that a reality. You start to attract those things. And I'm a strong believer that we attract thoughts that are on the same frequency, which is why when you have a negative thought, it's like, it seems like more negative thoughts come with it. 100%. Or when you're in a positive vibration, it's like all these positive things start to come to you. And so ultimately, that's what I believed happened, was that I was on this frequency and I attracted this book and this story. And so the story was about them doing this. And then they ended up going to a realtor, and they didn't get into all of the details, but they ended up moving into their home literally 2 months later. And then this thought popped right into my head. And the thought was, call the realtor. And it's really weird when you have inspired thought, because when you think throughout the day, you're just kind of like, yeah. But when you're on a certain level of frequency or vibration, when you get those type of thoughts, you're like, something different about that thought. And it's really hard to explain unless you've experienced it. And so I was like, okay, I need to call the realtor. And I kind of resisted it. And I was like, nah, but we don't have, I don't know how we're going to move into a new home. At that time, my credit was terrible from my past. Mm-hmm. So I was like below bad. And so I was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to get a mortgage. At this point, we were living in my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time. We were living in her condo. So I was like, if we're going to get a bigger place, I'm going to have to get on this mortgage. And when they see my credit, they're going to go, there's no way we're going to let you get a house. Like, it's just not going to happen. Once again, it's this idea that we have all these weird ideas in our minds, all these limiting beliefs about what we can and cannot do. And so I kind of resisted the idea of calling the realtor. And then finally, the thought just kept coming. And I was like, okay, you know what? So I texted my wife and I said, you need to call the realtor? I guess book an appointment. And she was like, oh, okay, sure. So we ended up booking the appointment with the realtor. And the realtor sat down with us and was like, yeah, you know what? Values have gone up, which we hadn't understood to what extent the condo in terms of its value had gone up. So he was like, you should look into talking to my mortgage guy. We'll take a look at that. And then we'll kind of take it from there. And so we sat down with the mortgage broker, and then they did an assessment on the house. And we sat down with the mortgage broker, and he was like, yeah, your credit's terrible. It's horrible. You should probably do something about it, but we could work with it. We'll still be able to get you a mortgage, which was like, okay, well, that's great. And then we got the assessment back on the condo and the value of the condo. And we found out that there was $250,000 in equity in the condo. And in that moment, I went, $250,000. That's the exact amount that I have been thinking about for the last, I think it was about 6 or 8 weeks. And the thing that's crazy about that is the money was there all along. I was not aware that the value of the condo had gone up that much. My wife was not aware. There's no way we would have figured that out necessarily on our own. But it was the attracting the thoughts that revealed where the money was. And that's the thing that I think most people don't realize is that we live in a world where opportunity and whatever it is that you want is in abundance. The only problem is that you just don't know where to go to get it yet. And that's the difference between living the life that you want and living the life that you currently have, is getting on a frequency where you're going to attract the things, the people, the books, the ideas, or whatever it is that's going to get you to there. It doesn't mean that it literally pops out of nowhere, right? It's not like $250,000 grew out of the ground, but whatever it is that you want is there. And it's just a matter of manifesting it into its physical form.
Interesting.
Little food for thought.
I definitely want to practice that. I could definitely use some things in my life for sure. And I've always been taught the same things, the manifestation and being aware of your thoughts and mastering your thoughts to make sure that you are attracting the right things in your life through your thoughts. So I definitely want to get more laser focused on thoughts because I know you've been really focused on that specifically lately. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that. How are you going about that? What have you learned about mastering your thoughts? Let's talk about that whole journey now.
Yeah. So I think what you said is really interesting because you want to do it, but it's a very hard thing to do.
It's very hard.
And I think one of the things that I learned was that we don't do things that we don't believe. If you don't believe something's going to work, you're not going to do what it requires in order for you to achieve it. And so, and just think about that, right? So it's like you start a podcast, right? Now, if you were guaranteed that this was going to blow up and it was going to become this wonderful thing and millions of people were going to listen to all of your episodes on a regular basis, if that was guaranteed for a fact, you knew that was going to happen in, let's say, 6 months, would there be any hesitation to put in the work?
No.
To be able to have that happen?
No, of course not.
Absolutely not. Now, this is the whole idea of like how powerful your thoughts are. So simply because you don't believe that it's going to happen, now all of a sudden, because you believe it's not going to happen, your behaviors will be consistent with that belief, right? And so you're going to now not do it because, what if this doesn't work? What if I put in all of this effort and it doesn't turn into what I want it to? It's going to be such a waste. And so all of these thoughts ultimately manifest in your results. And so I think that the hard thing is, how do you believe things? Right? Like that's the foundation of everything. I think a lot of people spend their time and energy trying to work on methods and tactics. Everyone's trying to work on behaviors. How do I change my behaviors, right? I want to eat better. And so, I need to eat avocados and I need to eat, kale and I need to eat plant-based foods. So everyone's trying to figure out the perfect way to go about in terms of their behaviors, changing their behaviors to get whatever it is that they want in their lives. Not realizing that the behaviors are simply a fruit and a reflection of the thoughts and the beliefs that you have. And so you can try all you want to change your behaviors. But if you ever, this is kind of my rule in life, if you ever find yourself having a really hard time to change anything, it's because you don't believe something. Or you do believe something and that belief is making it hard. Life should be effortless, which is very hard for most people to believe because it's like life is hard. A lot of people struggle. And if you've gone through anything difficult in life, which is everybody, then you have this idea in your mind that life has to be difficult. And it doesn't have to be that way. When you align yourself in your thoughts and when you align yourself with the way that you should think and believe, what you find is it's very, very easy to do things. It's very easy to do things. And so it's like if I have a certain belief about my relationship with my daughters, that it's wonderful and I'm building them into these wonderful human beings and that this relationship is really, really important and all of these things, I'm kind of compelled to do the things that create that. But if I'm scared that I'm going to screw them up and I'm scared that I'm going to do all of these bad things, it's like now all of a sudden this relationship gets divided. And so it all really stems with your beliefs. This is why people who try and change their diet or try and change their habits in terms of working out, can do it for 2 to 3 months, but then eventually they fall back into a pattern. And so I always like to say that anyone can change a behavior for a short period of time if they just work on the behavior. And if that's what you're after, I just want this for 3 months or whatever, that's fine. What I typically find though is when you just worry about the behaviors, it's painful, it's hard, it's exhausting. And then you just fall back into the same patterns that you had before. And then you're discouraged. And now you're like, I have to go and do this. So like I used to do this thing where I'd go to the gym for like 3 to 6 months and I'd just be so good, so on point. And then I'd fall off the wagon for like 2-3 weeks. And then I'd just get so discouraged that I wouldn't go back for another 6 months. And so it's like half the year I work out, half the year I don't. And it's just been this cycle for my entire 20s. That's just been my life. And I think most people kind of relate to that. They go, yeah, I've tried to change a ton of things in my life, but I've never really seen long lasting change. And so I think what most people miss, and I don't think we hear this enough in the personal development world, which I love. Like I'm a product of personal development, but a lot of personal development led me astray in the sense that it focused on methods and tactics. And if you think about a lot of books, it's like, get up at 5 a.m. and do this and do that. And it's a very much a do behavior type of kind of, these are the things that are going to change your life, 7 steps to whatever it may be. And when you look at that, you go, oh yeah, that's all behavior thinking. It's all just trying to change the behavior. And very, very few books will ever talk about this idea of your beliefs and your thinking. Bob Proctor met this guy who, at the time, this was probably in the 80s, who was the first person that he knew that had a PhD in thinking.
PhD in thinking.
PhD in thinking. And you go, oh, that's interesting. And if you think about that, you go, well, everybody thinks. That's not anything special. But if you think about it, most people unconsciously think, or, you know what I mean? It's all subconscious thinking. They don't intentionally, consciously think through their lives. Most of it's autopilot in what we do. And so here was a guy who got a PhD in how to think. And if you really think about that, you go, that's probably the most valuable thing that could be taught to a human, is to learn how to use this mind. It's the only thing that separates us from anything else that's living in this world, right? Like we have plants, they're living. We have animals, they're living. They're all living, organisms, but none of them have a conscious mind. It's the one thing that separates us. It's the reason why pigs don't build buildings, right? And cars and planes. It's the fact that we have a conscious mind that can create. And so I don't think there's enough time and energy spent on how to properly think. So I guess to go into that whole idea is the time and energy that goes into the books and the audios and the seminars and all of that, I really think should be you should take it away from the do and the behave for a while and start to work on really trying to assess and learn how to properly think. And a lot of that comes from the belief that thinking is as valuable as it is. If you don't believe that thinking is the basis of everything, you're probably not going to spend a ton of time and energy trying to work on it. And I think that's it, is that our society has put a lot of emphasis on behaviors. And so that's why people do read the books on it and do go to the seminars on it. But no one's really talking about this idea of thought and that your thoughts create things. And so that's probably where I would start. And that's where I started, was that I just ended up picking up some books and I took a break. I kind of did a personal development fast. And I was like, I'm not going to read anything on trying to change my behaviors. I'm going to spend the next 3 to 6 months just trying to better understand my thinking. And as I did that, I read, a handful of books. So Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, The Science of Getting Rich by Wallace Wattles, As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. And then there's this audio called The Strangest Secret by Earl Nightingale. And all 4 of these books basically say the same thing in a different way. And a lot of them are old. So like The Science of Getting Rich, I think, was written in 1910. As a Man Thinketh, I think, was 1908 or something like that. Think and Grow Rich was, I think, in the 40s or even in the 30s. So a lot of older books and ideas. They can be a little bit more difficult to read because the language is a little bit older. But what it ultimately did was it made me get a better understanding and a better idea of what my thoughts are, what they do. And then it was very easy for me to do the affirmations, for me to visualize, and for me to do all of the things that are required to manifest. But if you don't believe that visualization is going to work, you're not going to do it. If you don't believe affirmations work, you're not going to do it. And it's also understanding the way that the mind works. It's like the mind works through conditioning. Anything that you repeat to it over and over and over and over again, eventually they believe. And so,
well, it's just like when you're growing up and you're told you're not good enough or you're not worthy or you're ugly or something like that. The more and more you hear it, more ingrained it becomes. And then you actually believe it yourself.
And that's it. So as you repeat these ideas and you repeat these thoughts, eventually what happens is you adopt them as a belief, right? That's exactly it. If you're told you're stupid every single day of your life as a child, you're going to think you're stupid. And then what you're going to do is you're actually going to behave in a way that's consistent with what you believe. And so it's this idea of, so I ended up reading this really fascinating book called Psycho-Cybernetics. And in the book, they cover this idea of the self-image, which is that people behave in consistency with what their self-image of themselves is. So if you say to yourself all the time that I'm a fat person, if that's your own self-talk and self-image, what you don't realize is that every single one of your thoughts has an image attached to it. So I'll give you an example. Think about your car right now. Can you see your car in your head? Think about your living room right now. Can you see? Okay. Think about your brain, right? So every thought comes with it an image attached to it. And so when people say things like, I'm fat or I'm lazy or whatever it is that I am, there's an image that comes into their mind. And what they don't realize is how often they're imprinting that image on themselves over and over and over and over again. And things that trigger it, right? Like you see someone, if you are someone who's overweight and you see someone who's skinny, you go, oh, I'm so fat. And that type of stuff is, you don't realize how often you're thinking these thoughts. The problem is when you have an idea of who you are, a self-image of who you are, you cannot deviate from it. So he talks about this idea of a plane has a gyroscope, right? So the plane is set to go in a certain direction. And this gyroscope is designed in such a way that if it deviates from the destination, the plane kicks back in and then it goes and it corrects itself.
Recenters, yeah.
So basically, he talks about this idea that that's how our human mind works, is that we have a built-in gyroscope. And what happens is your self-image of yourself is your way of telling your body how to behave, what to do, what choices, what decisions, all the things that you do in life are determined by the images you hold in your mind of who you are as a person. That's why this idea of your beliefs are so valuable. And so what I've started to do in my own life was I stopped thinking or seeing myself in my own mind in ways that I didn't find consistent with where I want to go. And so if I'm somebody who doesn't want to eat junk food, I see myself driving home. And if that Tim Hortons that I usually go into, instead of seeing myself go into that Tim Hortons, I see myself drive past it. And so same thing like with my eating habits, I would eat these big portions. And it was just so hard for me to change. And then finally, I started to put this image that whenever I sat down, I had these really small portions and I was very satisfied. And this crazy thing happens when you start to change the identity of who you are. It's like you really don't want to do the things that you used to want to do. But it all really starts with this idea of who do you believe that you are? And with those beliefs, you will behave in consistency with that.
I'm Jessica, and thanks for tuning in today to Love Unplugged, the podcast. If there are any questions or topics you'd love answered on the show, head on over to www.projectloveco.com and share your request with me. If you haven't yet, go to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast and share it with a loved one. Your feedback means the world to me, and the community we've created is what fuels our discussions here. After all, this is all for you. Join me next time for another unplugged conversation.